Welcome to fourth grade history. This is lessons 157 and 158, combining a couple lessons. We are looking at pages 225 to 227. There's a comprehension check on page 226 and one on 227 to do on paper. Also, CCU 18, page 237, we're doing numbers 1 through 3. That can be on the same page as these. And then homework for the lesson is to study pages 222 to 227 for a quiz tomorrow, okay? We'll look at that. All right, if you'll get your states and capitals out, so 254 to 255, if you need them. If you're gonna try to say them by yourself or without the help of reading them, go for it. We're gonna go through the list. So we get a good breath and we'll get going, okay? Montgomery, Alabama, Juneau, Alaska, Phoenix, Arizona, Little Rock, Arkansas, Sacramento, California, Denver, Colorado, Hartford, Connecticut, Dover, Delaware, Tallahassee, Florida, Atlanta, Georgia, Honolulu, Hawaii, Boise, Idaho, Springfield, Illinois, Indianapolis, Indiana, Des Moines, Iowa, Topeka, Kansas, Frankfort, Kentucky, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Augusta, Maine, Annapolis, Maryland, Boston, Massachusetts, Lansing, Michigan, St. Paul, Minnesota, Jackson, Mississippi, Jefferson City, Missouri, Helena, Montana, Lincoln, Nebraska, Carson City, Nevada, Concord, New Hampshire, Trenton, New Jersey, Santa Fe, New Mexico, Albany, New York, Raleigh, North Carolina, Bismarck, North Dakota, Columbus, Ohio, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Salem, Oregon, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Providence, Rhode Island, Columbia, South Carolina, Pierre, South Dakota, Nashville, Tennessee, Austin, Texas, Salt Lake City, Utah, Montpelier, Vermont, Richmond, Virginia, Olympia, Washington, Charleston, West Virginia, Madison, Wisconsin, and Cheyenne, Wyoming. Very good. All right. Today we are taking a look at some more Americans that were making headway for, there were other national backgrounds that were coming into government positions. All right, so we have Senator Daniel Ken Inouye. I looked this up. Inouye is how to pronounce that, his last name. So Daniel Ken Inouye, and then Representative Patsy Takemoto Mink. They were both for the state of Hawaii. They were, one was a senator, of course, and one was for the House of Representatives. Daniel was the first Japanese American to serve in the U.S. Congress. Okay, he became one of the most influential senators in Washington, D.C. And then Patsy, as a representative, became the first Japanese American woman to serve in the U.S. Congress. And so they both represented the state of Hawaii. They both, of course, lived there. I didn't look up when he died, but she died back in 2002, so it's fairly recent. It's within the last 20 years that she passed on, but they were both influential in being another nationality and being in the government and trying to make a difference. There were many Spanish-speaking, those from Mexico, Puerto Rico, Cuba, that achieved success. Both New Mexico and Florida have had Hispanic governors, and many Hispanic Americans have served in Congress. Native Americans have also influenced our government. Let's see, in 1992, Ben Nighthorse Campbell, a Native American from Colorado, won a seat in the U.S. Senate. He voted against harsh environmental laws and for job growth in the mining industry in his state, and so he was very influential there. You're going to read the people worth knowing more about. There's Marian Anderson. She was an opera singer. Mary McLeod Bethune. She headed a federal agency. Benjamin Oliver Davis Sr. Was in the Army. Daniel Chappie James was I believe he was in the Air Force. James Weldon Johnson was a poet. He was also a Christian. Jackie Robinson, you probably know that name. He was a major baseball player. Ethel Waters was an actress, and she sang some gospel music too. Phyllis Wheatley was a Christian poet. And then Daniel Hale Williams was a physician. And so there's many things that many many areas of life that others from other nationalities have achieved this success because they didn't give up. And that's probably the main thing with their lives, is that some of them were Christians and they trusted in God and they didn't give up. And some of them maybe weren't Christians, but they didn't give up and they had achieved that success. We were enjoying some new inventions, and remember that things like the washing machine and dryers were being invented, and things to make life easier and faster. Travel was becoming very popular, and they were wanting efficient travel. And so President Dwight D. Eisenhower began a project called Interstate Highway System, and this was to make highways across the United States, and they're the same highways that we have today. I believe we've added a few, but these interstates are major highways called interstates. They connect all parts of America. They're wide and they're straight. Of course, in the mountains, they're not going to be quite so wide and straight. Some of those roads are not as wide and not as straight, and you have to compensate for that. But other places they are, and they are wide enough. Some of them, they're so wide that an airplane could land on them, and some actually have made emergency landings on a road that doesn't have anybody on it. And so we have that. But then there was also space travel that became popular, and so 1958 was when NASA was started. That's the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. And in a couple years, they launched Explorer 1, the satellite, the first satellite. And then 3 years later, Alan B. Shepard was the first man to go into space. Then they had careful planning. 1962, John Glenn was the first American to orbit the Earth. Now, he wasn't the first man to orbit the Earth. The Russians had us beat on that. But John Glenn was the first American. And then they had a lot of work to do. They needed to make sure that everything was just right. But in 1969, they sent Neil Armstrong, and he was the first man to walk on the surface of the moon. And so those things were milestones in the space program. We continue to send people we continue to send space shuttles up. They created the space shuttle that looked like a very large jet that they could use again and again, because it would launch like a rocket, but then they would land it like an airplane. Okay. And so they developed, they wanted to create a space station. People were talking about this. It was like the buzz. Everybody was talking about how, oh, well, if they create a space station and scientists can go up there and spend months at a time, then, maybe people could go up and visit and all this stuff. And so everyone was talking about it. And it became such a big deal that space shuttle launches were exciting. Everyone would know when it was coming, and so they'd announce it and they would tell everyone, okay, so school children, adults, they'd watch the launch. They watched the Challenger on television in 1986. One of the astronauts on the crew was Krista McAuliffe. She was a school teacher, and we were shocked. I wasn't alive at this time. I was not born. It was the year that my sister was born. So my brother would have been about 3, and so I don't know if he remembers it and have to talk to him. But the shuttle exploded on takeoff, and this was the first major tragedy with the space program. so far. And all 7 crew members died in the explosion. They didn't, there's many questions as to what happened about that. But despite that, they continued forward. They started working again. They tried to fix all the problems. And so we sent more up, and there were more shuttles that went. But in 2003, I was alive for this one. And I was about 13 at this time. And so this was the first one that I got to really, this is the first one I kind of remember. But the Challenger, no, sorry, not the Challenger, the Columbia was sent into space, and they were on their way back into the Earth's atmosphere. But something had happened when they took off. Something was damaged, and they didn't know about it, or they would have tried to fix it before they came back into the Earth's atmosphere, but they didn't know about it. They found out later from looking at the pieces that came back. But as it re-entered Earth's atmosphere, it suddenly started breaking apart, and it exploded, and everything burned up. So all 7 crew members there on board were killed as well. And so we again were reminded that there was danger in going to space, that we didn't have everything figured out, and it wasn't just like, we pretty much have taking a lot of testing with air travel, right, in airplanes and all of that, but the space program is very, very experimental. Even though we've been in it since 1958, there's always that chance that something like what happened in 1986 and what happened in 2003 could happen again, because it's so important that every last detail of that space shuttle is exactly as it should be. And if something goes wrong, then they don't know about it, then tragedy happens like this. And so, I don't want to make you guys feel all depressed about this, but the reality is space travel is pretty new, even though, for you guys, you're thinking 1958, that's the year that my dad was born. But it's within the last 100 years. And so that's not very long. You think about what has happened. The Earth is around 6,000 to 8,000 years old. America's only been a nation for just over 200 years. So for something to have happened in the last 100 years and only been for, it's even less than that. It's like 60 to 70 years that we've been working on the space program. That's not a whole lot of time for all of the things that need to be made sure of. And so that's why there's not as much travel. It's also very expensive to send a space shuttle up. And so when you consider the cost of sending a space shuttle and the fact that our country is pretty much in debt right now, in a lot of debt, the cost of sending it up there, and not really having the research that they do while they're up there. Some of it is beneficial, and some of it is stuff that we've done here on Earth. And so we can create in a laboratory. And so the benefits of space travel they don't always outweigh the cost and the risk with it. So that's why it's not as common right now. And so we may looking forward at maybe something that happens more in the future, but they're going to have to get some of those things, make sure that there's a lot of things taken care of, so that it's not, so that they can cut down that risk. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm going to let you guys go ahead and read these pages. Make sure you study them for on the quiz tomorrow and do comprehension check 18A and 18B there on these 2 pages, and then CCU 8, page 237, numbers 1 through 3. And we will see you in the next lesson.